It's day 6 of testimony. It's getting ready to resume after the lunch break in the trial of former President Donald Trump. Returning to the stand for more cross-examination this afternoon, Keith Davidson. He's a lawyer. He says he was the one who brokered the hush money payments on behalf of Donald Trump to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, another woman that Trump supposedly bought her silence, a former Playboy model. We've got live team coverage starting off with ABC News' Olivia Rubin outside that Manhattan courthouse and attorney and former prosecutor in the Justice Department, Ankush Khardori. So, Olivia, let's start with you. Where do we expect things to pick up when court gets back underway? Keith Davidson, this witness right in the middle of all of these actions taken by President Trump. What do we expect?
He was, Terry, and we expect that Donald Trump's attorney is going to pick up his heated and pointed questioning of Keith Davidson and the way that he handled himself in brokering the $130,000 payment between Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels. Donald Trump's attorney, Emil Bovee, has sought to paint Keith Davidson essentially as an extortionist, someone who was a career-long guy who would find women who are making claims and extort money from powerful men so that they would not come forward with him. Donald Trump's attorney actually brought up a previous investigation that Keith Davidson was ensnared in which he was investigated for extortion. Of course, there doesn't seem to have been any charges there, but he is trying to paint that here. And he referenced previous texts that the jury saw from Keith Davidson asking for much more money for Stormy Daniels' agreement that she made with Michael Cohen. At one point, he asked for $1 million, well above the $130,000 that they settled on. So that is the framing that Donald Trump's team is going for here. And it did get quite tense at points, Terry, before the lunch break. And Emil Bovee was essentially saying, we are looking for truthful answers. You have to answer the questions. And he shot right back and said, I am answering your questions, sir. And it was broken up by a sidebar, but very tense. And you could see that Donald Trump sort of appreciated that. He was leaning back in his seat, angled right towards the witness on the witness stand to his right, and really taking in this tense questioning, which we know is something that he probably enjoys.
All right, Olivia, thank you for that. Also with us, ABC News executive editorial producer John Santucci. So, John, you know, what Olivia just described as Donald Trump smiling in appreciation as his lawyers go after a witness. Now, that happens a lot, but there is a sense that Trump wants his lawyers to be more aggressive. Do you get that sense?
Oh, without question. I mean, listen, we know that Donald Trump, at the end of the day, Terry, believes that he is his own best attorney, spokesperson, you name it, insert title there. He believes he's number one. So clearly, whatever Donald Trump's lawyers do, though he may be satisfied, he's not going to be ecstatic. And I think that's a really important thing here as this gets going. And I think that, look, one of the things that Donald Trump famously says, Terry, you know this, is that he doesn't throw the first punch, but he is a counter puncher. So to see anyone on that witness stand that is saying anything that Donald Trump thinks is a slight or attack on him, he is going to want his lawyers to punch back. The other thing we must remember here is that Donald Trump so often talks to all of his lawyers and says, you know, I wish you were more like Roy Cohn, of course, referring to the infamous attorney that actually was at one point Donald Trump's attorney in the early portion of the former president's business career. And every lawyer that has come into contact with Donald Trump has been given that ultimatum, that comparison. Why aren't you more like this? I remember this. I liked that. And at the end of the day, Terry, it's part of the reason why Donald Trump has gone through, as we both know, so many attorneys, especially within the last decade that he has been a politician. You know, how many lawyers that are part of this legal team were a part of Donald Trump's original legal team when you were going through the campaign or special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation? The answer, zero.
Yeah, he is a tough client, no question about it. Ankush, Bovee, Trump's lawyer, suggested that Davidson was committing extortion when he negotiated the payment to Stormy Daniels. Now, you know, this is something that apparently he makes a practice of, paying money to people to keep silent who've been involved in some kind of thing they don't want the public to know about. First, is that extortion, or are they're actually talking about something else too, I guess? What do you make of his argument?
Well, I mean, look, it's not extortion per se, unless there are a whole bunch of additional facts that we don't know that make it a much more coercive endeavor. But I think that the broader theme that Trump's lawyers are trying to portray, and I think they're doing a pretty good job of it, quite honestly, is of a fact pattern that involves a whole bunch of unseemly characters, right? There are no really sort of heroes in this story. There aren't really any sympathetic parties. I think some of the jurors may have learned for the first time in the last few days that, it was Stormy Daniels who effectively solicited this payment. And it's not the situation where she was sort of coerced into it, which I think is a misapprehension that some people who aren't that familiar with the case may have. So, any particular witness's cross-examination is not going to make or break the case, but we do see a theme here developing that I do think is going to continue throughout this case.
Olivia, you've been in court. You've described the contention in court. It's quite natural in a criminal trial. There's a lot at stake. Have you got a sense of whether the prosecutors, are satisfied with the way things are going, or are they getting discombobulated a bit by the way Trump and his team are trying, to really throw anything at him to throw them off their stride?
We haven't seen much of the prosecutors being, thrown off their tracks in any way. What Donald Trump's attorneys have been doing in the courtroom is quite standard. They are trying to pick at the witness where they can and get a punch in when they can. And they have not always been successful with that, particularly with the cross-examination of David Pecker. Donald Trump's attorney was trying to land some tougher punches on him, making it seem like he was changing his story, switching up his credibility, but it sort of became this convoluted line of questioning, and one of the prosecutors on redirect was able to quickly pull David Pecker back into the direction that they wanted and get on the record a bunch of statements from him about how this was related, in his opinion, to the 2016 election. So they have been able to navigate that quite well, but it does not take away from the story that Donald Trump's team is trying to weave. I think we just heard it. Unsavory characters, Hulk Hogan, Tila Tequila, Rahm Emanuel bought stories. They are throwing every name there to try to say their central line, this was business as usual, and you may not like it, but there is nothing wrong with having someone sign an NDA. There is nothing wrong with making this sort of agreement, and there is nothing wrong with buying someone's story. So that is the thread that they have been trying to weave there.
Well said. So the prosecutors are saying what's wrong is that he misidentified those payments on business records, and that was in furtherance of this effort to keep it from the voters, which is an election law violation, they say. John, I want to ask you, and Anchorage as well, I want to ask you about the contempt hearing today. Prosecutors made clear they don't want to seek jail time against Donald Trump for alleged violations of the gag order yet. Is it possible that the court would actually put him in jail?
Oh, it's definitely possible, Terry. I mean, listen, we know ABC News reported about a week ago that federal prosecutors, of course, have weighed this conversation over times as, of course, Donald Trump went through all of his proceedings involving special counsel Jack Smith, what would happen, could it happen, et cetera. But in New York, things actually took a very different turn last week. We know that members of the Secret Service had conversations with the NYPD and court officials here in Lower Manhattan, and that conversation did in fact happen, that if Judge Juan Merchan decided that Donald Trump violated the gag order and thus said temporary confinement of some sort was necessary, how would it work? So they've absolutely had those conversations. But Terry, I also think an important point, and not to be her spokesperson, but Olivia Rubin made this first earlier this morning. She was sitting in that courtroom. Donald Trump's demeanor during those proceedings, I think, was the most striking of the day, because you got to see Donald Trump react to all of this, right? Because it's so much at the end of the day about Donald Trump's own words, his statements, and where this gag order violation is different than the first round, being the one that he's already been punished with a $9,000 fine that's due tomorrow. This round is Donald Trump on camera. It's Donald Trump actually speaking to our station, WPVI, leading up to the Pennsylvania Republican primary a week ago. It's him on the radio. It's him outside of court, Terry, at that very camera. And at one point, Judge Juan Merchan actually made a remark saying, well, your client doesn't need to make a statement there. He doesn't have to speak there. And the defense attorney agreed. That is the weirdest thing for a defense attorney for Donald Trump to do, because at the end of the day, the way you and I and Olivia, we breathe oxygen, Donald Trump's oxygen is looking into the camera. So anyone saying, no, he doesn't have to do that, I'm not sure that's a conversation afterwards I would want to be a part of, but God, I'd love to listen in.
Yeah, and he does have a constitutional right, Anka. She's running for president, but also just as an American. And I want to ask about the gradual tightening, it seems, of the restrictions of Donald Trump. It's one thing to talk about a judge's daughter or a judge's clerk or jurors, but it's another thing to retweet or to repost on his Truth Social someone who is insulting Michael Cohen, who the witness who is out there insulting Trump, is just talking smack back and forth. And I'm mindful of the Supreme Court saying that the threshold for a gag order is the imminent danger to the judicial process. And how would an appeals court, look at this gag order, not trying to threaten a court clerk or the daughter or family member of a judge, but just basically out there as a presidential candidate as well as a defendant, mixing it up with Michael Cohen.
Yeah, it is a tricky little situation because, of course, Michael Cohen has been very much engaged in this back and forth himself. And I think the judge has acknowledged that as well. And he sort of suggested that Michael Cohen should perhaps keep some of his thoughts to himself, and Cohen has indicated he may. But yeah, I agree. Like the gag order here, I don't expect Trump to ever face jail time in connection with this, because the statements are unfortunate and they're derogatory to the witnesses and, more importantly, to the jury. I care less about Michael Cohen than I care about the jurors, candidly. Same with Stormy Daniels. I care about the jurors, not these folks. But they aren't so damaging that I think the judge will feel compelled to try to send Trump to prison. I mean, he's going to keep racking up these fines. And more to the point, I think over the last few days, we have seen Trump modulate his comments. He has not been attacking the witnesses or the jury in the last few days. He was at some rallies yesterday where he offered some very sweeping comments denigrating the court and the judge, but those are okay under the gag order. He does seem to be coloring within the lines, at least for the time being.
Color within the lines, that is not something one associates with Donald Trump, but you're right. We may be seeing, under the pressure of this gag order, a new defendant anyway. Ankush Kadori, John Santucci, Olivia Rubin, thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in to I Run Content. If you want to stay updated on the latest news, hit that subscribe button. Also, give this video a like and share it to help us reach a wider audience. Let us know what you think about Trump's court standings in the comments below.